So, here, folks, welcome back to another session on Azure Fundamentals. Today, we have with us Mrs. Sanya Sinha, who is a Gold Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador and a multi-phase personality. She has delivered multiple lectures on different advanced topics of Azure. So, I think she would be one of the most perfect personality to tell you about the basics of Azure and how to get started and the things. Now, let's invite ma'am to please continue with the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Varun. So, hi everyone. Wish you all a very happy Holi, first of all. So, I'm Sanya, and let me just start sharing my screen with you so that I can actually talk about our lesson for today. So, our topic for today is Azure Fundamentals. Azure Fundamentals is our actually very basic knowledge that you must have about Microsoft Azure before you actually start working on it. Also, Azure Fundamentals or AZ 900 is also the name of the Microsoft Azure certification that you must have if you're actually proceeding into the world of Microsoft Azure. So, this talk is basically going to encompass very basic information about Microsoft Azure, and it's perfect for you if you want a beginner's perspective into Azure as a cloud computing infrastructure as a service, platform as a service application. So, without further ado, let us begin straight with our talk. I'm Sanya. I am an Azure developer lead for the Patna region. I am a Gold Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador and Azure Hero, as well as an upcoming summer research intern at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm very passionate about Microsoft Azure. I have worked on multiple projects with Microsoft Azure, and I'm sure that with very basic information about Azure, you would be able to do wonders and you would be able to explore multiple domains effectively. So, before I actually start talking about Azure, let us start talking about cloud computing. So, what exactly do you mean when I say cloud computing? So, cloud computing is the delivery of computing services over the internet by using a pay as you go pricing model. So, this means that instead of running your computing services on premise, you can actually run your applications on the cloud, or as we can say, run it remotely. Also, you only pay for the resources that you use, which is actually really effective because you don't actually have to pay for the entire bandwidth of the resources that can be offered to you by the cloud service. You are only paying for the services that you are actually using. So you typically pay only for the cloud service that you use. There are multiple cloud services available, and it's not just strictly limited to computation. You have services for networking, you have services for internet of things, you have services for artificial intelligence, serverless computing, and so on. So the cloud is basically a one stop destination for all applications that you would need to compute. So cloud computing can also be said to be the delivery of computing services over the internet. So over the internet is typically known as over the cloud these days. So these services include servers, storage, databases, networking, software, analytics, and intelligence. Cloud computing offers faster innovation, flexible resources, and economics of scale. So naturally, since you're only paying for the resources that you are using, and you have the full flexibility to scale your resources to accommodate as much infrastructure as is required by your business solution. It is actually much recommended to actually use a cloud computing application or a cloud computing service rather than working on premise. So working with on premise infrastructure is both tedious because you need to have all the resources with you. This means that you first need to gather abundant resources, and then only would you actually be able to use them. But with cloud, it is completely reversible. You actually use the resources first, and then based on the resources that you have used, you can pay them accordingly. You can pay the cloud service providers accordingly. So, this is actually why cloud computing became so popular. And with cloud computing, you have access to abundant resources. You can use as much as you want. You can scale your solutions to as much computational capability as is required by you. And therefore, cloud computing offers faster innovation, flexible resources, and is definitely much more economically feasible to use as well. So, cloud computing can also be said to be a way to rent compute power and storage from someone else's data center. So, your data center is not strictly limited to the computer that you're using right now. You can use the data center located anywhere in the entire world, and you can retrieve resources from that data center if you are accessible to use it. You can treat cloud resources like you would treat resources in your own data center. So, naturally, if I'm working on a cloud like Microsoft Azure, I have full flexibility to work with all the other resources that are offered to me by Microsoft Azure. For example, if I'm working on serverless computing for the time being, I have full flexibility to integrate my service of serverless computing with an AI based application or with an IoT based application. So, this means that you have the full flexibility to use as much compute and as many resources as you can from an external data center. So when you're done using these services, you give them back. You're billed only for what you use. So this is, I would say, the tagline for any cloud computing service. You are billed only for what you use. And cloud enables you to power your services and deliver innovative and novel user experiences more quickly. Because definitely, since you're working on a much faster system, because you're not actually even working on a system, you're working on the internet. And naturally, since you're actually working on something that has such a huge bandwidth, you are not limited to the resources offered to you by your system. You actually have the full capacity and the full flexibility to work with as many resources as is needed by your business solution or your technical solution. And accordingly, the speed can vary. And therefore, since it is actually not limited to a narrow bandwidth, you can use as many resources as is expected by you to use. So I hope I was clear about what is actually meant by cloud computing. If you have any doubts, feel free to put them in the chat box. Now we are going to talk about what is Azure. So Azure is a cloud computing platform with an ever expanding set of services to help you build solutions to meet your business goals. So Microsoft Azure is one of the leading cloud service providers. It is a cloud computing platform, and it has 250 plus services that really help you to build the solutions that can help you to increase the productivity of your business. So Azure services range from simple web services for hosting your business presence in the cloud to running fully virtualized computers for you to run your custom software solutions. So instead of simply running the cloud and linking it with your computer, with your personal system, you actually have the capacity to run a virtual machine or a virtual computer on the cloud itself, and you have the full flexibility to expand the number of virtual machines accordingly to serve your business needs. So this is one of the best possible use cases, or one of the best possible uh, p- areas of interest for cloud computing, because you can actually scale your resources to unlimited bandwidth, and that is how you can use a service like Microsoft Azure. So like I said, you can run virtualized computers for you to run your custom software solutions. You have a very broad spectrum of services from which you can select a service that you would like to use. For example, I am very familiar working with Azure's AI ML services or Azure's cognitive services. So traditionally, if you're training a machine learning model, it would take a large amount of time. Let's just say if you're training an object detection or an image classification model, it would typically take about 2 to 3 hours to get trained, first and foremost. Then it would require you humongous amounts of code as well. Obviously, it's not that easy to process for everyone. And next, the next important faculty that we're going to be talking about with non-cloud related machine learning or non-cloud related image classification is the fact that it's actually very compute intensive. This means that if you don't have a particular GPU or a particular specification in your GPU, then it would actually be very difficult for you to process. But with applications like custom vision, which was brought to you by Microsoft Azure, you can actually classify images accordingly with amazing performance metrics. So usually, if I am training an image classification problem, it on my computer, on my local infrastructure, it would give me an accuracy of about 70 to 80% best. However, if I'm actually working with a service like Azure's custom vision service, it is liable to give me an accuracy of greater than 92% at all times. So this is actually really great because it's actually providing you with all the services that you need at one place itself. So that is why Microsoft Azure is considered to be one of the leading cloud service providers. Azure provides a wealth of cloud based services like remote storage, database hosting, and centralized account management. Azure also offers new capabilities like AI and Internet of Things. So now you know what Microsoft Azure is. It is a platform as a service as well as an infrastructure as a service platform. And using it, you actually have access to a very broad spectrum of cloud based services from storage to databases to networking to AI and IoT. And naturally, besides these, you also have full compute specificity, and you also have full authority to expand and to scale your business solution accordingly. Now in this particular PPT, we are going to be discovering Azure services, and these are a list of services that are brought to you by Microsoft Azure. So let's just take a look at them first, and then I'll delve into them specifically. So as you know, it's a hybrid cloud service. The hybrid cloud services include Azure AD Connect Health, AD Privileged Identity Management for identity and access management, domain name services, backup, Azure Monitor, import export services, Azure Site Recovery, and Store Sample. And besides these, you also have security and management services brought to you by Microsoft Azure, which include the Security Center, the Azure Portal. So Azure Portal is just like your dashboard, which provides you with all the Azure services at one particular place, and then you can choose your services accordingly. Next up, you have Azure's Active Directory, which is once again used for security purposes. Azure AD B2C, business to commerce venture, multi-factor authentication using the Authenticator app. You have the automation features. You have Azure Key Vault in order to store some passwords or some keys that you really hold dear and which require privacy. You have Azure Marketplace in order to look for multiple services that you would like to shop for. You have the virtual machine image gallery, which would contain all the images that you require or that were clicked or that were processed during your work on the virtual machines that were created on the cloud. And you have REST API and command line interface calls as well. Next up, we have media and content delivery network. So media and content delivery network services include media services, media analytics, and content delivery network. Next up, we have CI/CD or integration. So you have API management, you have Azure Logic apps in order to trigger a workflow which would accordingly trigger a set of events. And next up, you have the service bus. And coming to compute services, you have container services, you have virtual machine scale sets, you have Azure Batch for batch processing, and you have dev test labs for actually testing how well is your business solution performing before it is actually deployed professionally. Next up, you have the application platform, be it for web applications or mobile applications. You have API apps, you have cloud services, you have service fabric, notification hubs. So I'm actually just reading this out, and I'll be coming to the specifics of this very soon. So please stay tuned. Next up, you have Azure Functions. When we're talking about developer services, we include Visual Studio Code, mobile engagement, Azure DevOps, Xamarin for application development, application insights, as you know, to monitor service health, and Visual Studio App Center. Coming to compute services, so these all were platform services, and now we are going to be also there are more services here. But we're talking about data services, for example, the SQL database, the Azure Synapse Analytics, Cosmos DB, SQL Server Stretch database, Azure Cache for Redis, stable storage, Azure Search. So all of these are platform services specifically devoted to processing data. Next up, you have intelligence services like bot services, cognitive services, Azure ML, and your analytics and IoT services include HD Insight for Hadoop cluster processing, machine learning, stream analytics, data catalogs for cataloging, data lake analytics services for large big data handling, data lake storage once again for big data handling, IoT hub, event hubs, data factory, and Power BI embedded. Now, coming to your infrastructural services, you have virtual machines, you have containers and Azure Kubernetes. So, if you're not familiar with Kubernetes, so Kubernetes is basically a container orchestration system. So, containers are basically, they could be considered to be um, actual real containers which contain all the code along with its configuration and external dependencies. And Kubernetes is basically used to orchestrate and to handle these containers that were created. Next up, you have storage. So, storage examples include blobs, queues, files, and disks. So, this is a very commonly asked question. So, in this particular slide, I'll actually be telling you about the questions that could be asked that could be asked when you're actually preparing for your AZ 900 certification is that what are the infrastructure storage services provided by Microsoft Azure? So it's blob, queues, files, and disks. And next up, you have networking services. So the networking services include virtual network. You have load balancer to include the to overcome and to keep tabs on the inbound and outbound flow of data. Next up, you have DNS, domain name systems, express route, traffic manager, VPN gateway, and app gateway. And now we will be delving into the specifics of these very soon. The core Azure services that we are going to be talking about specifically include compute, networking, storage, databases, web mobile applications, Internet of Things, big data, and AI. So let me just talk about these Azure services independently. So this is the official Microsoft Learn documentation, and we're actually going to be giving you a tour of these services. So let's just talk about the compute services. So the compute services offered to you by Microsoft Azure basically give you umpteen flexibility, as I said, to accommodate as much infrastructure as you would like to have in order to deal with your business requirements. So this means that you can scale your solution automatically. You can use as many virtual machines as you require, and there are a range of services, a range of compute services that is offered to you by Microsoft Azure. So the services under the compute tag under Microsoft Azure include Azure virtual machines. Like I said, these are actually computers, typical computers, just the fact that they are located remotely within the cloud. So these virtual machines could be based on both Windows or Linux, and they are hosted on Azure. Next up, you have Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets. Like I said, they offer you umpteen scalability, and they could be used to scale your virtual machines, either Windows based or Linux based. Next up, you have Azure's Kubernetes services. Like I told you, Kubernetes is a container orchestration system. So AKS or Azure Kubernetes Services ensures cluster management for virtual machines that run containerized services. Next up, you have Azure Service Fabric. So Service Fabric allows distributed system platforms that run in Azure or on-premise, and it's responsible for handling them and managing these compute resources independently. Next up, you have Azure Batch for parallel and high performance computing applications. More or less, this could mean that it's responsible for computing batch applications, but you're actually responsible for processing large amounts of code, large volumes of data simultaneously. Next up, you have container instances. So if you're familiar with any cloud, be it GCP or AWS, you would know what container instances are. So containerized apps run on Azure without provisioning servers or virtual machines. And next up, you have Azure Functions. So Azure Functions are basically event-driven serverless compute service. So even though the name serverless makes you believe that there is actually no external server that is required, that is not the case. Serverless typically means that you are not responsible for handling and managing the server. The server is there, but you are not responsible for managing it. The server is managed by the cloud itself. And Azure Functions basically help to trigger workflows. For example, if I set a workflow, if I set an automated workflow that whenever the clock strikes, let's just say 12 of a particular day, I want it to look through my personal calendar, and I want it to send a personalized card to whichever friend has a birthday on a particular day. So for example, if it turns to 18th March and it sees that a particular friend of mine has a birthday, it would automatically send a particular card to that person, a happy birthday card to that person. So you can use Azure Functions to actually trigger such workflows, and in this particular example, the workflow that we're talking about would be the clock striking 12. So this is what Azure Functions is supposed to do. So next up, you have networking. So this was enough about the compute services brought to you by Microsoft Azure. Now we are going to be talking about the networking services, which actually allow you to integrate your cloud-based applications with your on-premise infrastructure. So linking compute resources and providing access to applications is the key function of Azure networking. Networking functionality in Azure includes a range of options to connect the outside world to services and features in the global Azure data centers. So let's just take a look at the networking features offered to you by Microsoft Azure. So first you have the Azure Virtual Network. So what it actually does is that it connects your virtual machines to VPN of a particular location. Next up, you have Azure Load Balancer, which I already told you balances the inbound and outbound connections to applications or the endpoints as well. So this means that you have full flexibility to actually monitor whosoever is actually requesting access to a particular endpoint, whosoever is actually requesting data, requesting application insights. Next up, you have Azure Application Gateway. So it optimizes the app server farm delivery while increasing application security. So networking features may mostly entail security features as well, because it's actually really important for you to note that only a particular set of applications or only a particular set of compute resources and on-premise resources actually have access to all the data that is present on the cloud. So actually ensuring that only authenticated resources have access to networking. All these various services were provided by Microsoft Azure so as to ensure that you have full flexibility and security when you're working on the cloud. So next up, you have Azure VPN Gateway. So it accesses Azure Virtual Networks. It is just a gateway to access your virtual network through a VPN based gateway. Next up, you have Azure DNS. So it provides ultra fast domain name system responses and ultra high domain availability. Next, you have CDN or Content Delivery Network, which delivers high bandwidth content to customers globally. You have DDoS or Distributed Denial of Service Attack Protection Services, which protects your Azure hosted applications from DDoS attacks. Next up, we have Azure's Traffic Manager, which controls the network traffic across Azure regions. You have Azure Express Route that connects to Azure over high bandwidth dedicated secure connections. This means that even when there is very high traffic, you can actually use Express Route to connect to Azure directly. You have Azure Network Watcher, which monitors and diagnoses network issues by using scenario based analysis. So, like I said, networking features mostly entail security based features itself, because it's actually very important to note that only authenticated applications and services have access to networking with the cloud and the on premise infrastructure that you have. Next up, you have Azure Firewall. Once again, a security feature implements high security, high availability firewall with unlimited scalability. And finally, you have Azure Virtual WAN, which creates a unified wide area network that connects local and remote sites. So this was all about the networking aspect of Microsoft Azure. So next you have storage. So like I said, it's a very commonly asked question. Which are the four types of IaaS servers offered by Microsoft Azure? So IaaS storage services offered by Microsoft Azure. So there are four. So the first one is the blob storage. So storage basically includes unstructured data, mostly data that has a lot which has a lot of size, which requires a lot of storage space. For example, video files or bitmaps. So blob storage is basically used for large objects and it's used for storing them. Next up, you have Azure file storage. So files can be shared and accessed and managed like a particular file server. So file storage, like I said, is specifically devoted to smaller sized applications like files, and it actually creates an entire file server like application from which you can ensure file storage and retrieval. Next, you have queue storage. So queue storage is kind of like a register, if you know what a register is in a typical computer. So it's a data store for queuing and reliably delivering messages between applications. So it's like a short-term memory kind of thing, and so it's just used for delivering insights and messages between applications really fast when you want there to be a specific speed that there is when you're actually communicating with various applications. So therefore queue storage is kind of like a secondary storage type of thing, not permanent. It's just responsible for transmitting messages from one particular location to the other. Next up, you have Azure Table Storage. So table storage is a service that stores non-relational structured data like structured no SQL data in the cloud, providing a key attribute store with a schema-less design. So if you would know that structured data basically has a fixed schema and it adheres to that particular schema. So a schema is can be considered to be kind of like a syntactical structure. But when you're working with NoSQL data structures, NoSQL databases, they actually don't really require much of a schema. So table storage is basically used to store non-relational yet structured data. So structured NoSQL data, and since it's NoSQL, it does not require any particular schema. Next up, you have mobile applications. So with Azure, developers can create mobile backend services for either iOS, Android, and Windows apps quickly and easily. So other features of the services include offline data synchronization, connectivity to on-premise data, broadcasting push notifications, auto scaling to match business needs. So I don't really think any of these points require much explanation. So, but I'll still explain it anyways. So, offline data synchronization means that even when you're working on a mobile based application, you don't really need access to the internet throughout in order to retrieve data. You can actually just ensure offline data syncing without the need to be connected to the internet. Next up, you have connectivity to on-premise data. So obviously, you would require your particular mobile to be able to retrieve information from the cloud, kind of like SharePoint or something. So this would ensure that there is connectivity with your connectivity between your phone as well as in the cloud. Broadcasting push notifications. So in case if, whenever you're going to push a particular request or push a particular command, it would definitely broadcast those notifications to you. And definitely it should definitely be allowed to scale auto scale as much to accommodate your business requirements. Next up, we have databases. So Azure is known for providing multiple database services so as to store the various varieties of data services, the various varieties of data types that are available, as well as the volumes of data that are available. So naturally, Azure provides a host of services for this. So services include our Cosmos DB. So Cosmos DB is a globally distributed database and it supports NoSQL options only. NoSQL means no non-structured query language related um, tables or non-structured query language related data. Next up, you have SQL database for managing SQL based data, for, like fully managed relational database with auto scale, integral intelligence, and robust security all integrated. Next up, you have Azure database for MySQL. So it's fully managed and scalable MySQL relational database with very high availability and security. You also have Azure database for PostgreSQL. So Azure database for PostgreSQL allows a fully managed and scalable PostgreSQL relational database with high availability and security and scalability. Next up, you have a SQL server on the Azure virtual machines. So it's a service that hosts enterprise SQL server apps in the cloud itself. So on your virtual machines, you actually have access to your structured SQL based data using the SQL server. Next up, you have Azure Synapse Analytics. So it's like a fully managed data warehouse and it has integral security with at state of the art with no extra cost required. Moreover, Synapse Analytics is not just used for data storage, it's also very important for data analysis and data processing. So it could be considered to be within both those categories as well. And next up, you have Azure Database Migration Service. So service that migrates databases to the cloud with no application code changes. So this means that without changing the configuration code behind the application, you can actually migrate your database to the cloud. Next up, you have Azure Cache for Redis. So it's a fully managed service cache, frequently used and static data to reduce data and application latency. Like you all know, cache should be cleared very frequently, and so Azure Cache is responsible for doing that. Next up, you have Azure Database for MariaDB. So like you have the Azure Database for MySQL and PostgreSQL, you also have Azure Database for MariaDB, which is for MariaDB relational database. Next up, you have Azure Web Services. So, Azure Web Services include the Azure App Service to create powerful cloud web-based apps. You have Azure Notification Hubs, so as to send push notifications to any particular platform from the backend. You have Azure API management to publish APIs to developers, partners, employees at scale. You have Azure's cognitive search, so as to deploy this fully managed search as a service. You have the web apps feature of Azure App Service. So you can actually deploy mission critical web apps at scale and you can actually manage them and monitor all the applications that you had created using Azure App Service using the web apps feature. And next up, you have Azure Cellular Service. So as to add real-time web functionalities easily. Real-time means functionalities like weather reports or whenever you are actually working on dynamic content for web pages. So you can use Azure Cellular Service. Next up, we have Internet of Things based services. So, IoT based services are taking the world by rage. They basically encompass a system of interconnected devices that are enabled with sensors. So these sensors can actually receive or they can actually perceive any changes in their physical environment and then they can report it. So people are able to access more information than ever before. Personal digital assistants led to smartphones, and now there are smartwatches, thermostats, and even refrigerators. Personal computers used to be the norm. Now the internet allows any item that's online capable to access valuable information. This ability for devices to garner and then relay information for data analysis is referred to as IoT. So many services can assist and drive end-to-end solutions for IoT on Azure. You have Azure IoT Central, so which is a fully managed global IoT service as a service, or sorry, IoT software as a service application that makes it easy to connect, monitor, and manage IoT assets at scale. IoT Central is actually a very good platform because it actually allows you with full-fledged dashboard support so as to monitor all your IoT devices independently. Next up, you have Azure IoT Hub. So Azure IoT Hub is basically the more fundamental version of IoT Central, and it's just responsible for being a router for bidirectional data flow, that is from the device to the cloud and from the cloud to the device. So it's like a very basic version with poor security features, and if you want more refined security features on your cloud, you can use the Azure Sphere service. So Azure Sphere service is a very full-fledged integrated service, and you can actually have full authority and full security embedded when you're actually using Azure IoT Sphere. You can also use IoT Edge. So it's a fully managed service that allows data analysis models to be pushed directly onto IoT devices, which allows them to react quickly to state changes without needing to consult any cloud-based AI models. So this means that without actually integrating artificial intelligence with IoT, IoT Edge enables you to derive application insights directly. Next up, we have big data handling. So, big data basically refers to data that has huge volume and variety, and data from weather systems, communication systems, genomic research, imaging platforms, etc., all encompass big data. So, naturally, handling data that voluminous is very important, and it's actually really tedious as well. Therefore, Microsoft Azure actually came up with multiple solutions to help you handle such large volumes of data. And so open source cluster technologies have been developed to deal with these large data sets, and Azure supports a broad range of technologies and services to provide big data and analytics solutions. So, like I told you about Azure Synapse Analytics, it runs analytics at a massive scale by using a cloud based enterprise data warehouse that takes advantage of massive parallel processors to run complex queries quickly across petabytes of data. So, basically, this means that Azure Synapse Analytics is responsible for processing large volumes of data by using multiple parallel processors simultaneously. Next up, you have Azure HD Insight, which is responsible for handling Hadoop clusters with massive volumes. And you also have Azure Databricks. So you can integrate this collaborative Apache Spark based analytics service with other big data services in Azure. So HD Insight is for Hadoop cluster handling, and Databricks is mostly for Spark based analytics. Next up, we have AI based applications brought to you by Microsoft Azure. So, AI in the context of cloud computing is based around a broad range of services. Machine learning is a data science technique that allows computers to use existing data to predict trends in data, to predict for future behavior, outcome, and trends. So, using machine learning, computers learn without being explicitly programmed. This was actually the definition of machine learning, that is enabling computers to learn without being explicitly programmed to do so. So, for example, examples for machine learning could include things like, recommendation systems. When you're actually looking at a particular type of video on YouTube, your YouTube search automatically knows that, okay, these are the videos that my particular client is interested in, and so those videos are displayed on your screen whenever you are working on them, whenever you are actually working on YouTube the next time. So all of this is based on your trends, and thus recommendation systems are good examples for machine learning. So let us take a look at the various AI and machine learning services offered by Microsoft Azure. So Azure's machine learning service allows cloud-based environment where you can develop, train, test, deploy, manage, and track your machine learning models. You have Azure ML Studio. So Azure ML Studio is a no-code interface. This means you don't really have to write code. There is actually it's a drag and drop UI, and you can actually drag all the steps. You can choose the algorithm of your choice when you're working, and you can simultaneously get results as well as visualizations for the training part. Next up, you also have services like Azure's cognitive services. So cognitive services allow your computer or your mechanism to actually perceive things the way humans perceive things. This perception could be vision based, for example, using computer vision or custom vision, speak based using text analytics services, or using the Azure for Language suite, which can either convert your spoken audio into text. You can use voice for verification or add speaker recognition to your application. It can also allow for knowledge mapping services, so that can map complex information and data to solve tasks such as intelligent recommendations and semantic search. So all of these fall under Azure for Language. Bing search, add Bing search APIs to your apps and harness the ability to comb millions of web pages, images, videos, and news with a single API call, and accept your natural language processing. You can also use services like bot service and bot framework to actually allow you to build bots and interact with them, just the way there are natural NLP bots that are created by various leading companies, which allow customers to interact with them and ask frequently asked questions. And finally, we are going to be dealing with the DevOps services offered by Microsoft Azure. So, DevOps services basically include bringing all together people, processes, and technology in order to automate the software delivery pipelines and integrate them with continuous values. So, you can actually build and release pipelines that provide continuous integration, delivery, and deployment for all your applications, which are called CI/CD pipelines. So, using Azure DevOps services, you can create as well as deploy these pipelines. You can integrate your repositories and application tests, performance application monitoring, and work with build artifacts. So you can also work with and backlog items for tracking, automate infrastructure deployment, and integrate a range of third party tools and services, for example, Jenkins and Chef. And all of these functions and many more are closely related with Azure to allow for consistent, repeatable deployments for your applications to provide streamlined build and release processes. So, what this actually means is that you can automate the entire software delivery process so as to not manually pushing it through the various steps, but actually ensuring that once a particular step is complete, for example, once the training part is complete, it is automatically pushed into testing. Once the testing part is complete, it is automatically pushed into validation. Once the validation part is complete, it is automatically pushed into deployment. And so this entire pipeline can be monitored and can be processed using DevOps. So DevOps services basically include Azure DevOps. So using Azure DevOps, you can use a development collaboration tool such as high performance pipelines, free private Git repositories, configurable Kanban boards, and extensive automated and cloud-based load testing. So Azure DevOps can be sort of like uh, Atlassian's Jira, and it is considered to be a collaborative workspace provider where you can actually collaborate on code, uh, collaborate on high profile or a particular organization centric code, and then you can work on that and you can finally check it, and finally you can deploy it to production. And Azure DevTest Labs can actually quickly create on-demand Windows and Linux environments so that you can test your demo applications before they are actually deployed. So all of these were the various Azure features that we talked about, ranging from DevOps to AI to big data, IoT, web, databases, mobile, storage, networking, as well as compute services. So this was a brief idea about the services offered by Microsoft Azure, and I think this is enough if you're actually just starting working with Azure. So if you have any other doubts, feel free to let me know.
I was saying, guys, if you have any kind of queries regarding Azure fundamentals, you can directly put them down in the live comment chat, and ma'am will be more than happy to help you with the things. Until the time, guys, people are putting their doubts. Can you please tell, is Azure fundamental exam worth it to give, or we should go with some higher exam or something?
I personally believe that Azure Fundamentals is the first exam that you should give when you are actually starting working with Azure. Because until and unless your basic fundamentals are clear, you cannot proceed to higher level examinations offered by Azure, right? So, Azure Fundamentals is a very basic level, beginner friendly examination. It's really easy to clear if you are actually passionate about working with Azure and if you have some basic knowledge. So, like I said, like I delivered this talk right now, you need to know about all the Azure services that are provided for you and for the processing of business applications and for developing business solutions. So, definitely, Azure fundamentals should be cleared before you actually start giving higher level like the data associate or Microsoft certified trainer examinations. So, that's what I feel.
Okay, this was a perfect answer for the question, ma'am. One more question I would like to ask from the side of all of our audience is that many times when the students are struggling that they want to start their career in cloud, whenever they approach to the mentor that sir, ma'am, we want to start with the cloud, what should we do? The mentor says one thing, that go with the basics, go with the basics, just get your hands and your grip strong on the basics. So what all are the services or what all are the things in Azure that comes under the basic that a student must do it very well and he must have a grip on those topics?
Okay, so that's a really good question. And I would say that it actually depends on your niche, whatever you are interested in working on. So if you are actually interested in if you're interested in DevOps, you should start exploring the DevOps services, like I said, like Azure DevOps or Azure Dev Test Labs. And you should actually start exploring those features more if you are interested in having a career in DevOps. If you're interested in machine learning, so definitely, if you're working on on a machine learning problem, or if you're working as a machine learning engineer, you must have some knowledge about a cloud-based application, because when you're actually working in the industry, you will be subjected to data that is actually huge in volume, and you cannot handle all of that on your local infrastructure. So you need to have some knowledge about at least one cloud service provider, which in our case should be Microsoft Azure because of all the wealth of services that it provides. So if you're working in the ML side of things, if you're working as an ML engineer, or as a data scientist, you should be, well aware of Azure ML Studio, about Azure machine learning services, about custom vision, computer vision, bot service, bot framework. So you should basically know about the services that are specific to the niche in which you're working. If you're working as a software developer, you should focus on the more web side of things, on the more web based applications. For example, applications including serverless computing, logic apps, Azure App Service, mobile apps. So all of these services can be used, can be explored if you're interested in working as a software developer. So, like I said, it basically depends on the niche you are interested in working in. So,
Ma'am, one last query I would like to ask from our from side of all of our audience, that whenever a beginner, whenever a college student goes who plans to learn any new technology, or whenever he tries that I must try this technology, two things come in his mind. The first question is, what is the scope of this technology, and can a fresher, as a fresher, can I start and can I get opportunities in the market if I do this? So, what would you like to say about the thing that what is the scope of computer sorry cloud computing, and what as a fresher can a person go in this cloud market?
definitely, you can definitely go into the cloud computing side of things if you're actually interested in it. And the first step to actually delve into the world of cloud computing would be to get more certifications in the field. Because until and unless you are certified in a particular cloud based provider, you cannot actually show the HR of a particular agency that I am actually interested in this particular cloud based provider, and I actually know. Because naturally, people don't assume freshers to be very proficient with a particular cloud based service, right? So you need to have more certifications in the field that you're working on, and once you are certified, I think it's well and good. Also, you must be very active when you are making open source contributions. So open source as well as certifications are the way to go if you're interested in working in the cloud front of things.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. You just gave wonderful answer to all the questions. And guys, as ma'am said that the best way to go into the market of cloud computing is go get more and more certifications. So you guys can join our Discord server. The link is being blinking on your screens. So there we are continuously providing you with the opportunities, like we are having quiz where you can enhance your skills and you can win the Microsoft goodies as well. And we are also providing you with the opportunities that you can get the Azure certification vouchers for free. Let me tell you that these certification exams are really very costly. They cost you around more than $100. So you can uh, just think that they can be very heavy at your pocket if you spend. So you can join the community and you can just take the help of community. There are several many benefits of joining communities other than these swags and vouchers as well. You get to have the expert guidance, like ma'am is also in the Discord channel. So if you have any kind of queries, you can directly ask to the mentor that I am having the particular query. The mentor will help you out, and if he or she is busy, then some other experienced person will help you out. And if you have any other question or any other queries, you can directly connect with the ma'am on the LinkedIn, and whenever she'll be free, she'll be more than happy to help you out with your query. And a huge shout out to our speaker that she took her time out on the auspicious day of the Holi, and she came here for the upskilling and enrichment of the students. So I'll really thank you, ma'am, for coming here, taking out your time. Hope to see you in another sessions with different more concepts of cloud. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.